The shells hit so fast, the crew never knew what destroyed them. One moment, HMS Indefatigable was turning to fire her guns at the German battlecruiser von der Tann. The next, a massive explosion tore through her magazines, and the 18,000-ton warship simply vanished. Smoke cleared to reveal nothing but debris floating on the North Sea. Out of 1,019 men aboard, only 2 survived. It was 4:04 p.m. on May 31st, 1916. 21 minutes later, it would happen again. And again. This wasn't supposed to be how it went. The Royal Navy had cornered the German high seas fleet, the moment Britain had been waiting for since the war began. The Grand Fleet outnumbered the Germans, outgunned them, had them trapped against their own coastline with no escape route. This should have been Britain's Trafalgar, the decisive victory that would end Germany's naval threat forever. Instead, the Battle of Jutland became a nightmare of cascading failures, design flaws, and tactical errors that turned Britain's most powerful warships into floating tombs. This is the story of how the world's greatest navy sailed into what should have been its finest hour and watched 3 of its mightiest ships disappear beneath the waves in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. But first, we need to understand how Britain and Germany arrived at this moment, and why everything about it was wrong from the start. The Dreadnought Race. In 1906, Britain revolutionized naval warfare by launching HMS Dreadnought, a battleship so advanced it made every other warship on Earth obsolete overnight. Germany, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, took this as a challenge. What followed was an arms race that drained both nations' treasuries and set the stage for catastrophe. By 1916, Britain had built 28 dreadnought battleships and 9 battlecruisers. Germany had 16 dreadnoughts and 5 battlecruisers. The numbers favored Britain, but the designs revealed 2 completely different philosophies about how to win a naval war. British battlecruisers were built for speed and firepower. They could chase down and destroy any ship they could catch. But to achieve this, British designers made a fatal compromise. They sacrificed armor protection. The theory was simple. These ships would be fast enough to choose their battles and destroy enemies at long range before taking serious hits. German battlecruisers were slower, but far more heavily armored. German naval architects had studied the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 and learned a terrifying lesson. In battle, ships get hit. A lot. They designed their vessels to survive damage that would annihilate lighter ships. Admiral Sir John Jellicoe commanded Britain's Grand Fleet from Scapa Flow in Scotland. He understood the stakes perfectly. Winston Churchill would later write that Jellicoe was the only man on either side who could lose the war in an afternoon. If the Grand Fleet was destroyed, Germany could starve Britain into submission by cutting off merchant shipping. Britain would have to surrender, and the war would be over. The pressure on Jellicoe was immense. He couldn't afford to lose, which meant he couldn't afford to take risks. Admiral Reinhard Scheer commanded Germany's high seas fleet. His situation was the opposite. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. If he could lure out and destroy even part of the Grand Fleet, Germany might break Britain's naval blockade. If he lost, well, Germany was already losing the war of attrition at sea. Scheer could afford to be aggressive. The trap that wasn't. On May 30th, 1916, Scheer ordered his fleet to sea with a plan. He would send Admiral Franz von Hipper's battlecruiser squadron north along the Danish coast as bait. British scouts would spot them and report back. Admiral Sir David Beatty's battlecruiser force would rush out from Rosyth to intercept, thinking they faced only Hipper's 5 battlecruisers. But Scheer's entire battle fleet would be steaming 50 miles behind Hipper. When Beatty took the bait and engaged, Scheer would appear with his dreadnoughts and destroy the isolated British battlecruisers before Jellicoe's main fleet could arrive. It was a good plan, but British intelligence was better. Room 40 in the Admiralty Building housed Britain's code breakers. They had captured German naval code books early in the war, and could read almost all German naval communications. When Scheer's orders went out, Room 40 intercepted and decoded them within hours. The British now knew the entire German fleet was at sea. Jellicoe ordered the Grand Fleet to sail from Scapa Flow. Beatty prepared to leave Rosyth. The trap was reversed. Now it was the Germans sailing into British guns. Except for one catastrophic error. When Jellicoe asked where the German flagship's radio call sign was transmitting from, Room 40 checked their tracking board. The call sign appeared to be transmitting from Wilhelmshaven Harbor. The analyst reported, "In harbor." He was technically correct. The call sign was in harbor because German procedure was to transfer the flagship's call sign to a shore station when the fleet put to sea. Scheer's actual flagship was in the North Sea, steaming north. But nobody in Room 40 explained this to Jellicoe. As far as the British commander knew, the German flagship, and presumably the main battle fleet, was still in port. He thought he was chasing only the German battlecruiser squadron. Both sides thought they were springing a trap on the other. Both were wrong. First blood. At 2:20 p.m. on May 31st, a Danish merchant steamer appeared between the two fleets. Both sides sent ships to investigate. At 2:28 p.m., HMS Galatea spotted German light cruisers and sent the signal everyone had been waiting 2 years to hear. Enemy battlecruisers in sight. Beatty's force turned southeast toward the reported position. He had 6 battlecruisers: Lion, his flagship, Princess Royal, Queen Mary, Tiger, Indefatigable, and New Zealand. Following them were 4 battleships of the 5th Battle Squadron, the super dreadnoughts, Barham, Valiant, Warspite, and Malaya, the most powerful warships in the world. Hipper had 5 battlecruisers: Lutzow, his flagship, Derflinger, Seydlitz, Moltke, and von der Tann. The stage was set. 2 battlecruiser forces, roughly equal in number, rushing toward each other at a combined speed of nearly 50 knots. First contact would come in less than an hour. What happened next would change naval warfare forever. The run to the south. At 3:48 p.m., the opposing battlecruiser squadrons sighted each other at a range of roughly 15 miles. Beatty immediately turned to close the distance, signaling his ships to increase speed and prepare for action. Here's where the first problems emerged. Beatty's signal flags were partially obscured by smoke from his own funnels. Captain Evan Thomas, commanding the 5th Battle Squadron in Barham, never saw the signal to turn. His 4 battleships continued steaming north for several crucial minutes before realizing their error. When they finally turned south to follow Beatty, they were now miles behind, too far to support the battlecruisers in the opening exchange. At 3:51 p.m., Hipper's battlecruisers opened fire at 15,000 yards. The Germans had invested heavily in range finding and gunnery training. Their first salvos were terrifyingly accurate. Beatty's ships returned fire at 3:52 p.m. But there was confusion about targets. Lion and Princess Royal both engaged Lutzow. This meant Derflinger, the second ship in the German line, was able to fire without being targeted in return. Her guns locked onto HMS Queen Mary. At 3:55 p.m., shells from von der Tann struck Indefatigable. Small fires broke out on the British battlecruiser's deck, but damage appeared minor. Indefatigable continued firing. At 4:01 p.m., von der Tann fired again. 2 shells struck Indefatigable's stern, penetrated her thin armor, and detonated inside X turret's magazine. The explosion triggered a chain reaction through all the magazines. Indefatigable's stern disintegrated. Her bow lifted vertically out of the water, hung there for a moment, then slid beneath the surface. Gone. Just gone. In less than 30 seconds. Beatty's flag lieutenant turned to him and said quietly, "Indefatigable is blown up, sir." Beatty, standing on Lion's Bridge, nodded once and said nothing. There was nothing to say. 1,017 men had just ceased to exist. But the disaster was only beginning. Queen Mary's last stand. For the next 20 minutes, the battlecruiser duel continued. The German ships were taking hits. Seydlitz was on fire. Moltke had damage to her fire control systems, but they remained in action. British gunnery was less accurate, and even direct hits often failed to penetrate German armor. At 4:21 p.m., the 5th Battle Squadron finally came into range and opened fire with their 15-inch guns. The super dreadnought's massive shells crashed into the German line. Von der Tann was hit and forced to turn away. For a moment, it seemed the tide was turning. Then Derfflinger fired. She had been targeting Queen Mary for nearly 30 minutes, scoring hits but nothing decisive. At 4:26 p.m., one of Derfflinger's 12-inch shells struck Queen Mary's forward turret. The shell penetrated the turret roof. British turret armor was woefully thin and detonated inside. The explosion was catastrophic. It blew the turret completely off its mounting and sent a jet of flame down into the magazine spaces below. Every safety system failed. The flash reached the main magazines. What happened next was visible to every ship in both fleets. Queen Mary's forward half simply exploded. A tower of flame shot 800 feet into the air. The explosion was so violent it lifted the entire forward section of the ship, thousands of tons of steel, and threw it sideways. The bow broke off and cartwheeled through the air before crashing into the sea. The stern section stayed afloat for perhaps 15 seconds, propellers still turning, before a second massive explosion tore through the after magazines. Queen Mary broke in half and sank in less than 2 minutes. Out of 1,266 men, only 9 survived. Beatty watched from Lyons Bridge as his second battlecruiser disappeared. This time, he spoke. The words would become famous. "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." He had no idea how right he was, or that the worst was yet to come. The armor question. Why were British battlecruisers exploding while German ships survived similar hits? The answer lies in 3 critical design differences. First, British ships had thinner armor. This was a deliberate choice. British naval doctrine emphasized speed and firepower. Speed is armor, the thinking went. If you're fast enough, you can dictate range and angle, making it harder for enemies to hit you. German doctrine was different. They expected to fight outnumbered and believed their ships needed to absorb tremendous damage while still fighting. German battlecruisers had deck armor up to 30% thicker than British equivalents. Second, British ships had serious design flaws in their magazine safety systems. Doors and hatches that should have contained explosions were often left open during battle to increase rate of fire. Anti-flash protection, systems designed to prevent flames from reaching magazines, was inadequate or improperly maintained. German ships had multiple redundant safety systems. Magazines were divided into smaller sections. Flash-tight doors sealed automatically. Ammunition hoists had emergency flooding systems. Third, British cordite, the propellant used in shells, was more volatile than German powder. British cordite burned hotter and faster, which increased muzzle velocity, but also made it more dangerous if exposed to flame. The combination was lethal. British battlecruisers were essentially floating bombs waiting for one lucky hit to detonate their magazines. And Beatty had just lost 2 of them in 22 minutes. The run to the north. At 4:38 p.m., Beatty's light cruiser screen spotted something that made every British heart sink. A forest of masts on the southern horizon. It was Scheer's entire battle fleet, 16 dreadnought battleships, plus escorts. Beatty immediately ordered his battered battlecruisers to turn north. The tables had turned. Now he was the bait, leading Scheer toward Jellicoe's approaching Grand Fleet. Hipper's battlecruisers pursued, still firing. The 5th Battle Squadron, now at the rear of the British line, took tremendous punishment. Warspite was hit 15 times. Malaya took 7 shells, but the super dreadnought's heavy armor saved them. They stayed in action, returning fire and hitting Seydlitz and Derfflinger repeatedly. At 5:40 p.m., Beatty's battered force finally came within sight of Jellicoe's grand fleet. 24 dreadnought battleships steamed in 6 columns, the greatest concentration of naval power ever assembled. Jellicoe faced a critical decision. His fleet was in cruising formation, 6 columns sailing parallel. To fight effectively, he needed to form a single line of battle. But which direction should he turn? Visibility was terrible. Smoke, mist, and the haze from burning ships reduced sight lines to a few miles. Jellicoe had only fragmentary reports about where the German fleet actually was. At 6:15 p.m., with German shells already landing near his scouting cruisers, Jellicoe made his decision. He ordered the fleet to turn east. It was the right call. As the Grand Fleet formed into line, Jellicoe found himself in the perfect position, across the German line of advance, with the setting sun behind him, silhouetting the German ships, while his own fleet was nearly invisible in the gathering darkness. Invincible's End. At 6:20 p.m., Admiral Horace Hood's 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron, 3 ships that had been scouting ahead of the main fleet, suddenly found themselves face to face with Hipper's battered battlecruisers at close range. Hood's flagship was HMS Invincible, the first battlecruiser ever built. She was older than the other battlecruisers in the fleet, but Hood was an aggressive commander, and he immediately turned toward the enemy. At 6:25 p.m., Invincible's guns roared. Her 3rd salvo struck Lutzow's forward turret, putting it out of action. Her 4th salvo hit Derflinger's rangefinder. For 5 glorious minutes, Invincible seemed to be winning her duel, but Derflinger and Lutzow were concentrating their fire on Hood's flagship. At 6:31 p.m., a shell from Lutzow struck Invincible's midship turret. The shell punched through the turret roof and detonated inside. Once again, the flash traveled down to the magazines. Once again, the safety systems failed. Once again, a British battlecruiser exploded. But this time, something different happened. Invincible didn't just sink. She broke in half, and both halves stayed afloat, standing vertically out of the water, like 2 metal monuments. Her bow and stern sections remained visible above the surface for hours, a grim reminder of the disaster. Admiral Hood went down with his ship. Out of 1,032 men, only 6 survived. In less than 3 hours of fighting, Britain had lost 3 battlecruisers and over 3,000 men. The Germans had lost none. The battle that wasn't. For the next several hours, as twilight turned to darkness, Jellicoe tried to force a decisive engagement. But Scheer, realizing he was outnumbered and outgunned, executed a brilliant series of maneuvers to escape. He turned his entire fleet 180 degrees away from the British line, a maneuver called a battle turn away, that German crews had practiced hundreds of times. The maneuver was executed perfectly, even under fire. The German fleet simply vanished into the smoke and mist. Jellicoe turned south to cut off Scheer's escape route. The 2 fleets maneuvered through the night, occasionally exchanging fire when cruisers or destroyers stumbled into each other in the darkness. By dawn, Scheer had escaped. The High Seas Fleet reached German waters safely,